Hello, welcome to the channel. I'm Nick, and today I woke up and chose violence. The title is not clickbait. I do think that 10mm sucks in handguns and in most cases in general. Now, before you start typing in the comments, some of my opinions are just my opinions, but some of them are from me working in the gun industry. So a little bit of background about me. I work in the gun industry. I work for a 1911 and 2011 manufacturer. Cabot Guns and Alchemy Custom Weaponry. We're a boutique manufacturer of high-end 1911s and 2011s. And earlier today, I got the umpteen millionth request for X model to be made in 10mm, and it was enough to put me over the top. So I decided that I wanted to make this video. It's not clickbait. I opened up my an adult beverage and decided to have a little fireside chat, if you will, minus the communist and government overreach of FDR, and talk about why 10mm, while it's getting more popular, really isn't going to get the popularity that 10mm people wish it were. And to go along with that, I'll give you some other information. I only own one handgun in 10mm. It is this Rock Island double stack 10mm. This one is actually really gussied up. I did a video on it when it was in its stock form a few years ago that made people very angry. Sorry, this is an IPA and it's making me burpy. Because I compared a video called Just As Good, saying, you know, cheap Rock Islands. Nothing wrong with being cheap, but they aren't just as good as high-end 1911s and 2011s. That made people very mad. So I did have this gun sent off and did a lot of work on the internals, added some pretty features like a carry cut, ball cuts up front, some slide bevels on the bottom, and then a Cabot. And so I had to end up going back there and finishing it up to bead blast it and send it off to chrome. So it made it a very cool gun. Oh yeah, and added an optic mount, the Cabot Alchemy optic mount. Sits a little too far back on the slide because not all slides are the same. But anyway, I'm kind of going off on a tangent because, like I said, I have had a couple adult beverages before making this video. So this is the only 10mm handgun that I own. And I'm not going to own it for much longer because I have decided that 10mm in handguns is stupid and unnecessary. So the first few reasons I'm going to give you are opinion-based, and I guess they aren't really that big of a deal, but if you get mad at it, I actually have the real reasons afterwards. And the first reason why I think 10mm handguns suck, or 10mm in general sucks, is because of 10mm people, the people who like 10mm. 10mm people are the vegans of the gun world. 10mm people are the CrossFitters of the gun world. I'm a pilot, so I can say this. 10mm people are the pilots of the gun world. What do they all have in common? They will tell you if they're vegans, CrossFitters, pilots, or yes, 10mm people. So you see it all the time. A company comes out with insert handgun here. First comments on Instagram, when's it going to be in 10mm? When's it going to be in 10mm? And the whole argument that I get from 10mm people always comes down to bears. Okay, I say, why not use 9mm? Why not use 45 ACP or some of the other available calibers? There's a lot of different reasons, but it always boils down to bears. And I don't know why that is. I don't think a handgun is really going to be a proper hunting accoutrement, an auto handgun. So if I was out in the wilderness and I was really concerned about bears, I don't think I'd take a 10mm semi-auto of any type. I'd be taking a minimum of a 44 mag revolver, and most likely a rifle, because any handgun is not going to do its work in many cases, okay, against bears. So 10mm people is the number one reason why I don't like 10mm. Number two is the fact that 10mm came from the FBI's request for a more powerful cartridge. Now, the FBI is a dubious organization from its inception and has only gotten worse as time has gone on. In the 1980s, there was the Miami shootout where a few FBI agents were gunned down and they were outgunned. However, it wasn't a caliber war. They were going into a situation where they were armed with revolvers and some 9mm handguns, but they were going up against a Mini 14 in 223. So it wasn't handgun versus more powerful handgun, it was handgun versus rifle. So in the FBI's amazing decision, and by the way, there's a video by Lucky Gunner, I'm going to link it somewhere here, talking about the history of 10mm. Watch that video, great information. But the FBI's great wisdom said The reason we had such a bad outcome is because we needed a more powerful caliber. So the 10 millimeter revolution was born, and it created all kinds of issues for the US handgun market because at the time, everything was dependent on what law enforcement or military was using, and then the consumer market came later. So Smith & Wesson, a few other companies, they really dove into the 10 millimeter cartridge. They ended up having guns that A, didn't work and or B, broke, and C, the FBI realized that their agents were too limp-wristed to deal with 10 millimeter, so it was phased out completely and entirely in the FBI, and then that led to the second worst caliber ever created, the 40 Smith & Wesson, or 40 short and weak, which also was adopted by many police agencies, and thank God it has died a very slow death, but it has pretty much kicked its last kick. So the fact that the 10 millimeter round came from the FBI's request it's the fruit of the poisonous tree, and it taints 10 millimeter for me entirely. And also the fact, go watch that video from Lucky Gunner, the fact that all of these issues led to Glock getting a foothold in the US market pisses me off even more. So now, all of that aside, let's talk about the real reasons why 10 millimeter sucks in handguns. The first is that it has a lot of variation in pressures and velocities. Now, SAMI spec does say that max chamber pressure for 10 millimeter is 37,500 PSI. However, 10 millimeter guys will surely talk to you about their hunting rounds, their bear rounds that are going to be well north of the 40,000 PSI range. And the problem with that is that type of a load and that weight of a bullet, the amount of force that's coming out there, is just not good for handguns. It's going to beat the hell out of your gun. When you look at the 10 millimeter versions of the 1911 that first came out during the 10 millimeter revolution, the Colt Delta Elites, they had a lot of different problems. They had problems with frames cracking. They had problems with reliability. In fact, almost every single 10 millimeter handgun that came out at the time had some reliability and durability problems. And I'm going to tell you that a lot of these problems do exist in some way, shape, or form in most, if not all, 10 millimeter handguns to this day. Now, when you have a 1911 and you're trying to make it in 10 millimeter, there's a lot of tricks that you have to do to really get it to run. And I'm going to talk about the 1911 specifically because that's the platform that I know the best. So to get a 10 millimeter to run in a 1911, you have to do a lot of different tricks. The first off is different things like the firing pin stop. So on a normal 1911 these days, you're going to have a rounded firing pin stop that cocks the hammer in a slow, even fashion. Well, on a 10 millimeter, most of the time they're going to use a flat firing pin stop, which is what the original 1911 used back in the day. And that flat firing pin stop puts more resistance against the hammer to stop that slide from unlocking. Because all of that chamber pressure, all of that energy, it's not really energy, it's force. It's mass times acceleration. All of that force is pushing that slide, and it wants to get your slide moving super quick. So flat bottom firing pin stop, that's number one. Number two trick that they use in the 1911 world is the mainspring weight. So people think the recoil spring is what's going to make your gun shoot flat. No, it's the mainspring weight. You're going to see mainspring weights minimum at 24, 25 pounds, where a lot of times in a 45 ACP, you can use 22, 23 pound mainsprings, all the way up to 30 plus pound mainspring weights. That's just to get the slide to slow down enough to get it to cycle and feed. And even at that point, you're going to see an extractor that's well tuned, still hucking brass across the field. $10 millimeter guys are going to tell you, oh, look at how far that brass flies. That's awesome. No, sir, it is not awesome, because even though it's flying really far, that brass is giving you an indication of how much velocity is going through this slide as it's cycling. And that velocity, that force, and that energy that's going through is being transferred to the entire gun. So you will not find a 10 millimeter handgun that has been fired a lot. And I'll talk about another reason in a second. You're not going to find a lot of 10 millimeter handguns that have a lot of rounds through them that don't look beat to hell on the inside, because the way you have to build a gun to get it to cycle with 10 millimeter is A, going to make it not super fun to shoot because it's going to be a very tight, hard to function gun, and B, it just beats itself up. Now, that gets on to the next topic of why manufacturers are probably not going to build XYZ gun in 10 millimeter, and that's because you're not going to buy it. If you're a 10 millimeter guy and you say, oh, if only they made it in 10 millimeter, I'd buy it. Maybe some of you will, but most of you won't. And the reason is that 10 millimeter is more expensive than 9 millimeter and 45. It is a more expensive round, and therefore people that buy those guns typically aren't going to be spending a lot of money on ammunition and training. So a lot of times guys are going to get 1, maybe 2 millimeter guns and or 2 10 millimeter guns and call it a day. So manufacturers look at that and say, well, yeah, we're going to get a lot of Instagram requests for it, but when the pedal comes to the metal, when push comes to shove, those guys aren't going to pony up the dough. So it's not worth it to make a gun that A, is going to be tough to cycle, B, is going to beat the shit out of itself no matter what, and C, is not going to sell that well to begin with. So 10 millimeter is just not well suited for most handguns in general. Now, what it is suited for, okay, I'll tell you right now, I know you guys are down in the comments section, just, tapping away. What 10 millimeter is suited for is for pistol caliber carbines. I would say SMGs, but then people say, oh, submachine gun, not always machine guns. Fine, pistol caliber carbines, because then you can size up all the components, you can have stiff enough springs, you can manage the recoil and not have that gun beat itself to death. And benefit from the extra velocity and the extra stopping power of 10 millimeter. But here's the thing. I'm not a huge PCC guy in general. I think any situation that you would be going from a handgun to a PCC or an SMG, you might as well just get a short rifle and use a rifle cartridge. So that's it, guys. This is a little fireside chat on why I think 10 millimeter sucks in handguns and in general, but mostly why no matter how much you ask for it, no matter how much you beg for it, every gun that comes out is not going to be offered in 10 millimeter. It's just not worth it. Have a good night.